Hello, everyone. It's Rachel. Welcome to the First Peoples Cultural Council online learning series. My name is Aliana Parker. I'm the Language Program Director at the First Peoples Cultural Council, and I'm very honored to be here as your host today for this webinar. Today's webinar is titled Navigating the Development of the Paul Creek Curriculum in Tlingit, and it's presented by Yvonne Jack. So before we begin, I want to share briefly about the First Peoples Cultural Council. I see lots of familiar names in our audience today, but also a few new ones. So for those of you who are new to us, the First Peoples Cultural Council is a BC provincial organization that has the mandate to support the revitalization of language, arts, and cultural heritage throughout BC for all Indigenous communities. First Peoples Cultural Council is grateful to have our office in the beautiful traditional unceded territory of the Husainich Nation in the village of Huchaflip. And today I am also calling in from Husainich territory, where I'm very grateful to live and work. We also have an additional satellite office at Tk'emlúps within the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. I just want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge Carleen August, who is one of our revitalization planning coaches, who is joining our webinar today as our moderator. So she's helping out with all the technical things like screen sharing and Q&A and chat and so on. So thanks, Carleen. And I want to invite you now. The chat is currently open, so I invite you if you'd like to introduce yourself, share where you're calling in from today. You know, we'll have a few people calling in from different parts of BC and perhaps beyond, so I welcome you to share that in the chat. And so now I am very honored to introduce our guest speaker today, our guest presenter. Yvonne Jack is a Taku River Tlingit First Nation member and the executive director of the Children of the Taku Society. Over the last 8 years, she has led the Children of the Taku Society in the development of an intensive adult immersion language program that uses the Paul Creek language curriculum translated from Insilkshin into Tlingit with the goal of creating fluent adult speakers of the Tlingit language. She has been really resoundingly successful in this work. I've had the great honor of supporting some of her work and getting to walk alongside for some small parts of her journey in this work and learning a lot from her. And I'm just really grateful. Yvonne, thank you for coming to share with us in this space in our online learning series. I know for a long time I've really wanted to have your story be more accessible to so many people, because I think it's a really, really powerful story and an inspiring story, what you're doing in Tlingit territory using the Paul Creek language curriculum. So I'm really excited to hear from you today and to learn from you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Yvonne. Thank you.
Aliana. So I just wanted to make sure to start off this presentation in my language, and much of what I was saying is reflected in the slide that you'll see here. I did want to make sure to say that this is an unusual format for me to be presenting in, and I am not used to not being able to see people, being online, and I also would need to take a lot of time to really be able to teach about the methodology and the work that we're doing, mimicking the Salish School of Spokane in what they had created. But it's really important to me that I'm able to help others to understand also that if it's possible for myself as an individual who doesn't have linguistics training and is a person who doesn't have any post-secondary education can be doing this from my home territory with a cohort of individuals who are passionate about language and just make that happen, that it's possible for anyone to do this and pick it up and work with it. And I wanted to make sure to put that little line at the end that I'm tired and I'm burnt out, because I think that that's important for people to understand um, where I'm at a time when it's kind of hard to present. It's not my favorite place to be giving people a true vulnerable understanding of how hard this work is. I just want to give people all the hope, but it does also, there are going to be moments, you know, if you're new to this work, if you're new to language work, even if you are decades in, there are just always going to be moments for us where we're low. And so times like this where we can connect and be together and share knowledge are so important. And hopefully there are some uplifting things that you guys are going to be able to take from what I talk about today, some hopeful moments of what the path can be forward. Again, whether you're new or whether you've been struggling in language revitalization for many years, because no matter who you are, it's hard. You know, the colonial world is not set up to support our languages right now. We are not set up for success. But it is very important that people can also identify with where we are, and that, again, we can just stay connected in those moments. So I wanted to start off by just making it very clear that we don't have the time today for me to give you all of the information that I would like to about the Paul Creek curriculum. But I'm hoping that I can give you a snapshot and an understanding of why I'm choosing to do this work and why a group of us in Taku River Tlingit Territory are working really hard and have chosen this just essential time in history where we have very few speakers available to us to be able to support and form the foundation of this work, to prioritize the Paul Creek curriculum, or as it's being coined now, an Indigenous language fluency transfer system. And so it's very important at this time in history for all Indigenous languages that you're being very wise about where you put your energy. And I think that there are many lessons around how to stay balanced in that, you know, how to make sure that there's replenishment and things that feel good. But it is essential for us to be able to create a way for any learner to be able to move through a sequential format in order to become a highly fluent speaker. And that's quite rare. So in my story, which I don't have the time to talk about and really give you all the details of what occurred for me over my lifetime, all the people who contributed to my desire to learn my language, and all of the disheartening moments where I was looking for my language and I couldn't find it in the landscape of what existed for Tlingit people. But I think that all of us have a story that's similar. We're looking for our languages. We're working really hard to be able to reverse some of the language shift that has been created by the genocide and the oppression of our people. And we're struggling to find a way to become fluent speakers ourselves and bring others along with us. And so I'll be talking about some of the pillars of the Indigenous language fluency transfer system today. And I'll hopefully be able to give you an understanding of why we're continuing to move forward, even in a moment where I'm a little burnt out and things have been feeling kind of disheartening for me lately. And so this is Lorraine Wiley and Christopher Parkin. They're married, and Lorraine Wiley is of the Insultion people. They have a unique story, but very similar to mine and probably yours. They wanted to become speakers of a dying language. And Lorraine Wiley, her story includes a moment in time, like we all have, where she went to her uncle's funeral and she found out that he was a fluent speaker. And she didn't know that she had any speakers of the language in her family. And it lit in her a fire and a desire to want to bring back the language for her people and do that important work. And so the statistics of their language were quite dire, but they were, I think, lucky enough and smart enough to have a whole series of opportunities available to them, even through those stark circumstances. And one thing that had happened that really contributed to the grassroots development of the Indigenous language fluency transfer system in Insilchin, the origins of this work, is that Christopher Parkin was a Spanish teacher. And so he understood what was necessary in another language, a level 1 language, which I'll explain more about later, a flourishing language, to be able to get people from 0 speaking ability up to having baby conversations in the language in a very short time frame. And so Lorraine, who Chris is married to, said, hey, let's figure out a way to do this in my language. You know, I'm going to classes in the communities and I'm spending a lot of time there, and I'm not coming out at the same proficiency that your students are learning even within 3 or 4 months. And so the origins of how this work developed and what they chose was born through trial and error, through them really going through processes of learning themselves and teaching others. Lorraine formed a language nest with other mothers quite early on, and those community individuals who really are the people who need to have access to the language and be able to speak quite quickly within those programs, those were kind of like their test subjects. And so over the years, they have been extremely effective in what they've done. They've made sure to only work with what has resulted in highly fluent speakers and been willing to let go of things that were not effective. And all of the origins of this work just have been extremely grassroots, extremely humble. They were lucky enough to have just a few speakers that were accessible to them. They had to travel quite far to reach them. And through this process, they were able to create a school that actually is thriving now. It's really important that if you have the chance, you go and check out their website. They actually have a new website now. This is where they store all of their curriculum. And as a starting point, it would be very important for you to go and see their language page, potentially download some of their curriculum, which they provide for free. If you're wanting to copy this methodology, by the way, it is one of their core principles that if you would like to basically access their copyright, that you need to provide your curriculum that you develop for free as well in your language. And they actually have an entirely new space. I think they were just granted through all of their hard work with a K-12 school now. They've been granted a new space, and you can see some of that work and some of the plans for that on their page. I honestly, as someone who is mimicking this work, do not know how they have the strength and the energy to do everything that they've done. It is astounding to me. Much of what they developed at the beginning of their work was focused on the teachings by Joshua A. Fishman. I wanted to just make sure that everyone was able to see this book. If you purchase it, just be warned. It is highly academic. It is a difficult book to get through. I had to look up many words when I was reading through even just the first couple of chapters, and I have not made it all the way through myself yet. But it's not necessary that you would understand everything in this book to be able to mimic the Indigenous language fluency transfer system and the teachings around that are provided by Christopher Parkin and Lorraine Wiley. But it's good to know that this work, that when you get in it, you really know, you can feel all of how comprehensive it truly is. It is based on a detailed analysis of 13 endangered languages, some which began to thrive through certain efforts, and some that dwindled and eventually died through methodologies and efforts that actually contributed to the deaths of those languages. And so much of the teachings of Joshua Fishman are built into the methodology. And in all of our experiences as a separate organization that is applying this methodology and these teachings to our circumstances in a different place with different people, we have found all of these teachings to be consistently true. Every time we stray away from the recommendations within this book that have been built into the methodology, we have found that we're either seeing less progress in our speakers and in our classrooms, or we're finding that there can often be other struggles and difficulties, and that we're spinning our wheels. And so it's very important that you understand how much thought, not just from the individuals in the Sailor School Spokane have done in this generation, but that the work has been built upon just a very thorough assessment of language shift across the world. One core teaching that came out of the research from Joshua Fishman was the understanding of where your language sits on Fishman's graded intergenerational disruption scale, or the GIDS. And so to give you a brief understanding of what's most important here, every language in the whole world is on this scale. You can see that it moves from 1 to 8, and that the descriptions in each category are very different. And so level 1 languages are languages like French, Spanish, English. They're the language in various locations that is used in education, work, mass media, and governments, and it's at a nationwide level. They're supported. There's a huge amount of funding that goes into supporting these languages being on an equal level. At a national level, it's on your cereal boxes. And then you can see the progression all the way down to level 7 and 8, which is where the majority of our Indigenous languages are sitting. And so at level 7, the childbearing generation knows the language well enough to use it with their elders, but is not transmitting it to their children. And at a level 8, the only remaining speakers of the language are members of the grandparent generation. Those individuals are usually very socially isolated, and they don't have anyone to speak to anymore. So for myself and for my people and for my language, we're at a stage 8. And it's so important that each person who's working is starting from this core teaching to understand and be able to communicate the urgency of where we are and why certain choices need to be made, and advocate for the methodologies that are going to work for where your language is at on the scale. And so Fishman advocates for very particular methodologies and strategies that will work at each level of this scale. And at a level 8, there are very particular things that you need to be doing. For example, I have heard of many communities where at a level, they're at a level 8, but they're trying to use something like a language nest, a methodology and a strategy like a language nest, to be able to revitalize their language. And the way that they're doing that is they're taking the only remaining speakers of their language who are at a grandparent age, and they are putting them in the language nests with 2 and 3 children that are under the age of 5. And they're hoping that those grandparents and individuals who are quite elderly are going to be able to transmit the language to those children, and then the children will be able to carry that language within them and save the language for their people. And that is it's a failing model for a language that is at a level 8. And it's really important to understand that, because often, running a language nest can be $1 million budget. If you have limited resources, which all of us do, if you have limited capacity in your community, which through the healing of our people is, and the genocide that we're still healing from is often the case, you really need to be wise about where you're putting your energy and make sure that you're choosing things that are going to truly reverse the language shift in your community and in your language and for your people. And so this is the confronting slide always for folks. And it's really important that we are speaking honestly. You know, there have been times in the past where I was reluctant to speak very honestly about some of Fishman's warnings, because I know that there are individuals out there that have put all of their life and all of their energy into some of these failing models of language revitalization. And I think that it's so important that we have space and compassion for ourselves and make sure that while we're going through all of these processes of confronting ourselves, because it is just so difficult for all people who are revitalizing dying Indigenous languages, that we are giving ourselves space to be able to heal and grieve and do all the other things that are coming with the process of revitalizing something that should have been our birthright. It's a hard job. It's a hard life's purpose. And in order to shift and change and make sure that what we're doing is making the difference that we all want it to, we need to be having these honest conversations. And so in the case studies from New Zealand, Ireland, Spain, Australia, the Netherlands, USA, Israel, and Canada, that Joshua Fishman studied and pulled the teachings that are in his book, what he identified is that making any of these programs and strategies the focus of a language revitalization program would kill stage 7 and 8 languages. And so I'm going to list them off now. Immersion schooling that is not connected to an adult fluency system. Public school programs, casual community and evening classes, cultural events with some language, or what some people are calling language pageantry, with just memorized language and memorized prayers, college classes, technology apps, websites, computer games, television shows and radio, and linguistic studies. As dominant strategies, these activities will lead to language death. And what I wanted to highlight is some of the bolded bullet points here are some of the programs that are consistently being run in the communities around me, and some of the programs that we have been asked to run as well. We were quite lucky very early on in my language journey. I was able to access the teachings from the Salish School of Spokane. I actually started my work as a volunteer in 2013, and my understanding only grew from there. But I can tell you that the Salish School of Spokane went through and facilitated every single thing on this list before they discovered the teachings from Joshua Fishman. And so their understanding of how these programs would result in were failing models and wouldn't result in creating highly fluent speakers is firsthand understanding. And as I said, every time the Children of the Taku Society has kind of strayed into some of these things, because the thing about it is they feel good. They are the casual community and evening classes that don't have expectations, especially some of the technology categories and spending time on the radio and cultural events in particular. It all feels really good. It's community-based, and it's not the humbling hard slog of truly learning language and achieving brain melt and knowing that you're progressing further and further. And so every once in a while, we dip our toe into something like this that is being asked of us by the community and feels really good. And then we see that there is almost no language acquisition in a lot of cases. And we're reminded of why we want to focus on something that is truly effective. And so alongside Fishman's recommendations of what to stay away from, he also has some strong recommendations on what you should be focusing on at a stage 7 or 8. Fishman's revitalization strategies for a stage 8 language on the Gids, where, again, as a reminder, only a few elderly, culturally isolated speakers are left, is to focus on reconstructing the language and creating new fluent speakers. And this is so important because in the example I gave earlier of a language nest that has elderly grandparent age individuals who may have health restrictions and other mobility circumstances going on for them, have limited time that they could spend in an environment like that. It is very hard on them to be spending that sort of time with young children. There's just this immense gap and so much weight that is being placed on those two demographics. And the need to focus on the reconstruction of the language and then creating new fluent speakers, those new fluent speakers need to be parent age generation or people who are young enough to be able to really carry that language and pass it on intergenerationally and in those language domain and fluent environments. It's so important that you are recording elder speakers addressing important cultural topics. And in order to support every program that you would like to create, including something like a language nest, you need to create a reliable, proven fluency system in order for all of those beautiful programs that feel so good to be able to grow and rest on. And that is the way to be able to have certainty and replicability in the how many new and young, hopefully, fluent speakers that you're going to be creating in your community. So why we chose the ILFTS is because of the status of the Tlingit language. Even 10 years ago, when I started this work, the statistics were dire. If anything, they've only grown more so over time. And as a person who's been working for 10 years in this field, I can say, having gone to language conferences, having attended many presentations similar to what's happening today, having visited as many programs in as many communities as I could, that there aren't any programs right now that are reliably creating highly fluent speakers in my language. And usually when highly fluent speakers are being created, it's because those individuals have had very specific and special life circumstances available to them, such as having a highly fluent grandparent available to them, or potentially they were chosen and handpicked to be in a master apprentice program probably 30 plus years ago at this point and had a really, really solid start to be able to build upon, or they may be linguistically oriented and have an affinity for being able to pull apart and reconstruct the language, which, by the way, I don't have. And so my experience has always been the need to learn the language in a natural approach, not by pulling the language apart linguistically and understanding each component of the Tlingit verb in order to be able to use a verb calculator in my head and then go through a process of reconstructing the language to then be able to produce. I think that that would have always been a struggle for me. I just don't have the brain for it. It's kind of like math for me as well. Maybe I could have gotten through it and gotten somewhere with it, but I think at some point I probably would have just accepted that I was never going to be a highly fluent speaker. And so in my community, the Atlan dialect is actually the first of the inland Tlingit dialects to go extinct. And I use the word extinct, even though I know that can be a struggle for people to hear, because for the same reasons I spoke about earlier, we're not even on the GID scale anymore at this point. The last birth speaker in my community passed away more than 10 years ago. And that means just by, this is one of the hardest things to say always, just by nature of how few new speakers are being created, and that there is no reliable path for people to be able to access our language within, that I, through the program that we're creating right now and piloting and taking a very long time to create, by the way, I'm one of the most fluent speakers in my community. And that is just heartbreaking. It's a really, really hard thing to say and to admit. We have access to master speakers. 2 out of 4 in all of the world exist 2 hours away from the Children of the Taku Society team. We're very lucky that I'm very lucky that I'm able to live at home and just drive 2 hours every week sometimes to be able to record with those individuals. I live in a remote, small community. And if I needed to move somewhere and live in that place in order to get this work done, I would, because that's how important this is to me. Our birth speakers and those we're able to access, we are in relationship with, are isolated. They're culturally isolated. And there are no places where the language is prioritized and spoken regularly for them, other than when they're doing their work with organizations like us. We're clear that the mother tongue transmission in our community is no longer happening. We're very far away from that. A child being raised in the language is very distant. We're also clear that we're not creating new speakers, never mind, not even second language speakers, never mind birth speakers, at the rate that we're losing them. Many learners that we're seeing in programs are also plateauing at potentially an intermediate or maybe mid-advanced level at the most. Some people are plateauing even earlier than that, and the programs are just not bringing people far enough, especially through a production and communicative approach, to be able to exist and live in the language. And I think that this is actually a really important place to start with honesty also, which is, have any of the programs or efforts in your community ever created a highly fluent speaker? And is that reliable? Can anyone enter that program and become a highly fluent speaker? If the answer is no, it is important to get really honest with yourself about that so that you can switch gears, change course, and start to put your efforts into something that is going to be effective for your community. And so for Children of the Taku Society, where we're at right now, what we're doing in this moment is we're focused on creating a Tlingit language fluency transfer system. There are very essential core teachings, like I said, that build and have, in a grassroots way, helped to form what this has become over many years. It started with Joshua Fishman and his understanding of what to do and what not to do. The Salish School of Spokane have taken these teachings and created an entire system in Salish, in Silkchin, to be able to move forward and get their teachers in their school very quickly, might I add. Once you build the curriculum, it can take a year for people to become highly fluent speakers with this methodology and this curriculum. They have a domain that is their school for people to exist within. They are working every single day. You know, Christopher Parkin is the principal of the school there, and Lorraine Wiley, all of their family are teaching night classes and training new staff. Even the cooks and the finance staff in their school take language classes to become fluent speakers. And this might be a good moment for me to mention that I went to visit them once, and that was when I really understood that in 2019, which was like a long time ago now, truly how effective this methodology was. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I was completely bought in yet. I started as a volunteer, and it took me a minute as well to understand the full potential of this methodology. But when I went there and I hung out in their grade 6 classroom with a bunch of 11 or 12-year-olds, if that's how old you are in grade 6, who were learning decimals, like in Salish, no English being spoken whatsoever, I was shocked. The kids were just looking at me like I was the biggest idiot they ever saw, because I couldn't even remember how to do decimals. Never mind not speaking in the language that all the children were speaking in. But it shocked me. I was astounded. And there is a fairly open door policy, I think, from the Salish School of Spokane to be able to go and witness this. But when you come from such a stark landscape of language revitalization with so few gains, never mind a reliable way to become fluent, and you're not seeing those outcomes anywhere around you, it can be very hard to imagine something that is so everybody needs to learn decimals. It can be really hard to imagine something that's as basic as that. And so I eventually, over time, understood more and more why this was important. I think that having some faith and just being willing to move towards something where you are seeing the outcomes that you want to achieve someday can be a hard step to make. But I strongly encourage you all, because it was the same for me. It took a little bit of time for me to buy in. And I even spent a few years not being involved in language at all because it was just so hard. And I burnt myself out really early. But I was called back to the language, I think by my ancestors. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are so that you can all understand that we're only partway through. In the fluency transfer system, as it's designed, there are 3 levels. You can see them here in this curriculum diagram for us. In each level, there is a language and then a literature book. And the language books really focus a lot on grammar from a communicative approach. And then the literature books are these beautiful stories that you can build to be true to your people. And so for us, we pulled all Tlingit legends and stories from our history. And that's what our students are learning at each level of the curriculum. The curriculum is comprehensive, and in particular, it's sequential. And again, there's not enough time here for me to talk about all of what goes into building the curriculum. That does take time. It is very specific. To build something that is sequential, you are paying attention to every little detail, but the payoff is unbelievable. From day one, students are able to come into an immersion setting and exist in the language. And on day one, it's not like everyone magically has the language. You're taking English out of the equation. But every single day that they're coming in and they're working within a methodology that doesn't have the gaps that you'd typically experience in a language course, they are able to build and construct a firm foundation of being able to communicate in the language. And by level 2, you're no longer saying, take English out of the equation in order to keep order in your classroom. You're having everyone's talking in the language now, and they're making all their jokes in the language. And so you're having to say, okay, everyone needs to stop talking all together, no matter what the language is, so we can get through the lesson. And that's a really beautiful place to be. So for us, these textbooks that are highlighted in teal are our complete first editions. And we are just transitioning, actually, this week, as Aliana knows, is the very first lesson that I'm going to be teaching as kind of the tester teacher in our pilot cohort. of our Yanyeidí textbook, which is Lingít Stories for Intermediate Learners. And we also, just as a side note, one of our recommendations that we received from the Salish School of Spokane, we are neck deep in the development and vetting of this curriculum all the time. But we did make sure to reprioritize our time and our capacity and our resources to make sure that we recorded all of our textbooks about a year and a half ago. And so we focused with the amount of time that we have left with our elders, we never have certainty. And so we wanted to make sure that we worked with them while they are still well and able-bodied and have the capacity to work with us for a few hours at a time. And we made sure that we recorded all of our advanced textbooks as well. So that material is just sitting there waiting for us to be able to come in and put all of those audio recordings, which form the foundation of all of your lessons, is your master speaker recordings. We are taking all of those audio recordings next year, the year after, and continuing on into advanced textbooks and building the curriculum and the teaching materials around that audio. And we have it just sitting in a vault waiting for us to be able to do that. And so this entire, all three levels form, again, a sequential and reliable fluency transfer system. That means people can come in and not be able to speak a single word of the language, never have produced a yes or a no or a thank you in your language, and they can move all the way through to the endpoint reliably and become advanced speakers. And in particular, some of the most important things that have shown up for me and what brought me in from the very beginning was that all of these textbooks are taught in a communicative approach. So there are many methodologies that build out this curriculum, including direct acquisition methodologies. It engages with the natural learning sequence. You're gonna be using methodologies like TPRS, but it's all in the language, and it doesn't move into some of what we've seen in other programs where you're learning about the language, but speaking in English. From day one, you're in immersion. And this is probably my favorite. I say that lots of things are my favorite about this methodology. And the Indigenous language fluency transfer system. But in particular, I always come back to this one thing, which is I didn't get to be a student in this methodology. I became a teacher immediately, and I was able to learn through teaching. And so from the beginning, the way that everything is set up, teachers are students as well, and you have cohorts of learners that are supporting each other to be able to make their way through the curriculum. And there are many beautiful things about that. There are many benefits. Again, I don't have as much time as I would like to talk about that right now, but those were some of my favorite things that showed up as I continued to buy into this methodology and this entire fluency transfer system for my language and my people. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Children of the Taku Society is, and in particular, why we've chosen this entity to do all of our work and to house the curriculum. So the Children of the Taku Society is a nonprofit organization. We're not affiliated with any particular First Nation government or organization. We've autonomously managed to form relationships with funders like FPCC over the years, who have been very willing to even navigate some of the complications of colonial structures and connect with us about how to, for example, have an organization that might be over a colonial border, but still be able to access the funding that was kind of cut off from us through this colonial border just being put right through the territory of my people. And so we've been able to focus on language revitalization over the last 5+ years. Although Children of the Taku Society is looking more broad spectrum and wanting to make sure to protect all of Tlingit ways of being. Really, though, if we don't have language as a foundation and the starting point, we don't have very many places to go. And so we've been focusing our energy on this for the last 6 years. We're governed by a board of directors that's all Tlingit, and we have employees that are almost entirely Tlingit from many different communities across on the coast. That transcends like an international border at this point, and from the different various inland Tlingit communities. We've done our revitalization work through a nonprofit specifically to protect it from politics and bureaucracy. We are no stranger to some of the power and control dynamics that stem from trauma. And oftentimes in our communities, we're going to be experiencing circumstances that will come up around that, and it can pull apart your work, your team, your curriculum, your classrooms. If you are struggling with this, never ask for permission to save your language. Just start your own grassroots space to channel your efforts into. COTS has encountered many different political and community dynamics, especially as we have become more and more successful and people are starting to witness our efforts and see the effectiveness of the curriculum and the work that we're doing. Much of what is this fear-based behavior is stemming from the internalized colonization tactics that we're all still navigating. And we're trying to navigate those things that have happened to ensure the survival of our people. I've watched generations of my people and my ancestors and my family lose heart over and over again. They become closed and hard and fearful and aggressive. And they can sometimes, through these dynamics, even give up and wish that they weren't Tlingit. So we're really focused on having that separation, not only so it doesn't pull apart our really, our very important and where we see all of our life energy going is in our language work, but also we are making sure to work on policies that are in compliance, but still prioritize our cultural ways of being. And when I say in compliance, I mean with potentially colonial laws, although we never allow colonial laws to supersede our traditional laws. It's hard work, but it's really been necessary. And so the Children of the Taku Society team is made up of many different individuals, master speakers, specialized contractors. We have a curriculum team, a teaching team, people who've taken on administration. The amount of skills we've needed to learn in order to do this work is just gargantuan. We're always in a learning curve. It's been hard. It's been hard to become kind of experts in so many different areas in order to be able to do this work. And rarely can you find people who have specialized skill sets who can take that work from you and bring it to completion. Usually, again, as I said previously, you're finding ways for your people's ways of being to thrive in a landscape that has not made space for that yet. And we're really on the front end of a movement in many different areas, not just making space for our languages and being able to exist in our languages again, but also what does it look like for us to have policies and procedures that are making space for Indigenous ways of being and existing within the seasons of harvesting, for example. And so it's been a really hard road. We needed to kind of balance our curriculum development and how many resources we were putting into that with the need to be developing new administrative processes that we hadn't seen in other organizations. And there is nothing more important than focusing on your curriculum development and the development of that fluency transfer system. But finding a way to be balanced within that so that you still have your wellness, you're productive, but you are, and you're holding high expectations, but you're still able to remain safe and healthy and whole within this work is really, really important. Our organization also has been learning trauma-informed methodologies and compassionate-based methodologies to be able to interact with each other and our community. And so hopefully, and this is kind of my bigger hope of about some of these presentations, is that those of us who are wanting to be connected so that we don't all have to recreate the wheel are going to be able to find a way to knowledge share and really transfer some of that understanding and information. And so then we don't all have to invest huge amounts of energy and huge amounts of funding to be able to find a way to develop the restorative processes, for example, that our communities need in that day and age. And one thing that I can say about our team is that every single person has sacrificed something to be there together. They are all individuals who have been willing to put aside going to school, living in other locations, traveling, to be in class every single week and vetting this curriculum. Ugh, I just feel emotional when I talk about it. These people are amazing. And we've all collectively had the desire and the commitment to the language is what pulled us together and motivated us to learn how to be able to do all of these things for our community, and so that we can pass on a way to become fluent to all of the generations to come. And so even though the Indigenous language fluency transfer system is the first step, there are other steps that will lead, that are necessary to be able to reestablish the intergenerational mother tongue transmission, which is a term from Joshua Fishman, in communities and in homes. And it seems really clean when I present in a slide like this, but so much of this is actually interwoven and overlaps. I wanted to speak a little bit about what we have experienced in each of these steps and where we are in some of what we've been developing and what we're looking forward to. So step one, creating an adult fluency transfer system or your own Indigenous language fluency transfer system. This is a simple slide, but it really represents millions of dollars and decades of work. So even just for COTS, we've been working on this full-time with a full team since 2017. A lot of our processes have ebbed and flowed. At one point, our team of numerous individuals we had almost $1 million in funding when we were going through the recordings of our elders. We had many different processes going on. We had many different team leads. We had, I think, 3 or 4 different classes happening. And it was really important at that time that we actually make the strong choice to take a step back from that many classrooms and really spreading out. The momentum in this work is going to pull you. You're going to want to make sure that other people have access to this, and they're going to want you to be the one to run their programs for them. But while you're creating the adult fluency transfer system, it's really important that you put blinders on and you just focus on that, because your time with your elders and your fluent speakers may be limited. And that's so important for you to be understanding. And if you're going to put your energy into work planning anything, really focus on that as the core understanding. How much time do you have with your elders and how accessible are they to you? If you have very few elders, they may be prioritizing other programs as well. And that cuts you down to maybe once or twice a month that you can actually work with these individuals. So really consider that in where you're putting your energy, who you're hiring on your team. Do you have the capacity to be training new staff? Or does it make more sense to just move forward with the people that you do have? Really invest in a priority order, and investing in your team first is necessary. Step 2, creating new adult fluent speakers. As I said, we really need to be prioritizing this so that we can fill those immersion spaces and those spaces where potentially we could be teaching children with highly fluent young speakers. We are in our pilot cohort advanced, like kind of, what is it? I can't even remember all the ways to say this, but I think we're like high intermediate, maybe is how we would be categorized in terms of speaking. And like I said, it takes exponentially longer to be developing the fluency transfer system compared to being the people who are going to learn through it. And so it's really important, as I said with the previous slide, to focus your energy. And then when you are creating new fluent speakers, bring in some of those compassionate and trauma-informed methodologies to be working with these people. When you're working with people who are young, like some of the beautiful people in this slide, all the way up to working with elders and silent speakers who will want to join your programs, you are working with individuals who are experiencing language trauma because they feel like they should know how to speak. And that is the most common experience that I'm witnessing, is even my unborn children will be born on the spectrum of language trauma because they don't have access to their language the way that they should have. And so it's really essential to recognize that you're working with humans and make sure that you're fostering safe spaces for everything that you do. A safe space for your team, safe spaces for students in your classrooms, and safe spaces for people to be learning, and safe spaces for people to pull out when they need to as well. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about, and just touch on this, that we are in the space now as intermediate speakers who can exist in the language for hours and days at a time with ease. We make lots of mistakes, don't get me wrong, but we can stay in the language. I thought that the experience of finally being somewhere where I could exist in the language all the time was going to be every dream that I had come true. And my experience of it was going to be nothing but uplifting and joyous. And I'm, as a speaker myself, as a learner, as the executive director of an organization that's prioritizing language, I've been shocked to discover that it can be a really hard step to take. It can feel really uncomfortable to start to exist in the language and experience some resistance from the people around you that you love most. It can feel out of sync to be speaking the language and have your family and to have your mother pull away from you because you're witnessing how hard it is that they don't know what you know. It can be hard to put all of your energy into this work and witness and wait for the people who matter to you most to join your classes, so then you can be speaking to them and watch them experience just overwhelming fear to join because they're terrified that they'll fail, which means that they are maybe not Lingít enough or not smart enough or whatever it is. And I think that when I started this work, I didn't realize how difficult some of these stages would be. One of the beautiful things about this moment is that I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of becoming a fluent speaker myself. I'm witnessing others around me reliably become fluent speakers and be capable of speaking at an intermediate level, even sometimes when they didn't graduate from an English-speaking colonial school. This work makes the language so accessible to you that you, if you engage with it, may encounter a whole new set of challenges that fluent speakers experience. And that is where I am right now as an individual, finding myself through learning the language, going through a healing process that's causing me to question everything in the world around me and every decision that I ever made. But this discomfort means that the change and the shifts are happening. And I firmly believe, and I have hope, that there will be an unknown tipping point for myself, my community, and my people. And that we're even able to have this conversation and begin to create the spaces that challenge us in this way is the gift that this fluency transfer system can give you, if you can have the courage to step forward into it. So step 4, which is the intergenerational mother tongue transmission, we don't have anyone in my community yet who is far enough in their language journey and is courageous enough, including me, to begin just speaking in the home. Take all of the language that can happen, language learning that can happen through this program, and begin applying it in this way. I believe that it's possible that I might end up being the first person to do that if I am so lucky to have children. And like I said, this is a step that's just very difficult once you are engaged with it. And sometimes the loneliness and despair that can overcome you when you are one of the only people that can speak in your community is immense. And when you've used all of your life's energy to revive a language, that's where you can start to question some of your choices. When you doubt that maybe you will be able to raise your children in the language or that others will be able to find the courage to do so. But it also means, and what I'm seeing every day, is a growing hope that my people will continue to survive for generations to come through this work, because true empowerment of my people and my ways of being exist in our language. And when I'm with my cohort and we're laughing in the language until we cry, when I see my sisters picking up a word here and there and proudly using one word in our language as we plan for the potlatch of my brother, you know, and how tightly they hold on to that one little gem of our language, that's where I find my hope at this time. And I couldn't have expected to be climbing a mountain of my own language acquisition and bringing others with me and find myself at the top of a mountaintop and see a view that looked pretty bleak bleaker than I was expecting. But I think that it's so important, as I said, that we're staying connected as language warriors in this work and all the work that we're doing, and that I'm able to be vulnerable and honest here with some of the challenges that have been arising for me right in this moment, presently for me, are sitting in my body. And as I said, there is nowhere else that I would rather be. I have true hope, and I believe that we're going to experience a tipping point for our language. And I hope that we can spend more time through organizations like FPCC to get more connected and find ways to hold each other up in those moments when we need a little more support than usual. And so my final recommendations are to start with honesty. If you're being held up by Indigenous politics, start a nonprofit. Use trauma-informed methodologies and training to learn to interact compassionately with your team and your community. Find a few good people and invest in them first in priority order. That's your team, and then your teachers, and then your students. Don't get stuck trying to fit into colonial processes or policies or even colonial laws. Remember, at one point, it was illegal for us to dance and sing our songs. Whatever it is, whatever you choose, make sure it's always effective and have a way of assessing that. Never ask for permission to save your language. This means no convincing of your leadership, your community members, your family. Just become fluent instead. There is nothing that will move you further than that. Never sacrifice your balance and your well-being. It will have taken us 20 years to bring this to completion by 2032. Try to do it faster than us. Trust the process and never sacrifice your safety. And one last understanding that I wanted to talk about, which is happening all around us. Don't get stuck in the sunk cost fallacy. And this is the phenomena whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. And I see this over and over again in all of my communities that I go and teach in, that I am presenting in, that my friends are a part of. The sunk cost fallacy is something that you just need to keep an eye out for. And you're going to experience that all around you when you're going through this work. People are going to challenge you, they're going to question you. And sometimes it's through fear, and sometimes it is because people just are struggling to let go of something that they've invested so much effort and time into. Be kind when you experience this. It can be really hard for people to let go of not only their fears, but the things that have taken up all of their life energy. There were dreams where they thought that the work that they were doing was going to be what created fluent speakers in their children and their grandchildren. And even where you're seeing that really clearly, they may not be able to, even after all the proof in the world, which is why you need to not convince people. So if you reach out to the Salish School of Spokane, you'll probably receive an email something like this. And it's open to everyone. They try to support everyone. It is very difficult for an organization that is focused on their own revitalization work to be able to prioritize all of the individuals who want to do this work. We in Children of the Taku Society remain, I think to this day, or last I heard, the language organization and language group that have moved the furthest in the development and completion of this fluency transfer system. Like I said in the last slide, many people get stuck and they may even develop the first textbook and then don't move any further than that. But Christopher Parkin will send out a YouTube link that Aliana is putting in the chat right now to a longer presentation that goes into the details and the specifics of his work. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in anything I spoke about today, that you would follow up with this YouTube link. And then you can see here that they often will provide recommendations to individuals to be able to access and see other language groups that are mimicking their work. And we're one of them. So if you're interested in taking a look at our page, which is under construction, by the way, we are the Children of the Taku Society, or childrenofthetaku.com. And this is linked to our language page. Yeah, it's a good sign if your website is crappy, because it means you're prioritizing language work. That's our theory. So with our Indigenous languages on the brink of extinction, the choices we make now are going to contribute to the death or the revitalization of your languages. We've been gifted with this methodology, and it changed the course of our nation's journey and we are reviving our language. And we're just really excited to share this with you and share our experiences. So, and when I say we, I'm speaking for my whole team, even though they couldn't be here with me today. Ganashish.
Ganashish Kedika, thank you so much. I just want to thank you so much for that awesome presentation and powerful presentation, really. And just for your vulnerability and honesty and openness about your journey, and the tough choices that you've made and that COTS has made, but also for the outcomes that you're seeing, and really what you're seeing as a result of those tough choices. I think it resonated with a lot of the people joining on the call today, to hear some of their own feelings voiced out loud, some of those questions and doubts voiced out loud, but to also see your journey is really validating. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And good night, Sheesh.